I don't know what kind of impact this can have on the team, but it felt like something had to happen.
Yeah, it's one of those deals. I do think it's a scapegoat thing because, like you said, something had to happen with the way, as inconsistent as the pitching staff had been, particularly the bullpen. I mean, Lilliquist got out of the 8th inning yesterday, and they won the game. Ironic, he gets fired after one of the pitching staff's best performances, Strasburg and Doolittle, yesterday. But Boz, who loves Mike Rizzo, even wrote the sentence in his column this morning, "This is Rizzo's failure." And one of the, when they fired Dusty Baker, Mike Maddox bolted and ended up, ironically, with the Cardinals. And Maddox is one of the most respected pitching coaches in baseball. So by firing Baker, they also cost themselves Lilliquist. And, there's a tendency in this town to not blame Rizzo for the Nats' failures. It's usually the Lerner's fault because they were the ones who wanted to fire Dusty. And,
Which is true, though.
What?
Which is true.
Yeah, but let's go back. I mean, again, I've said before, I'll repeat it again. I don't get along with Rizzo. You guys know that. Mm-hmm. But I also think he's a good general manager. However, he's not been a good general manager in terms of putting together a bullpen. And it dates back to when he hit the panic button to me after Storen did melt down in the last game of the Cardinals series. And he'd been a very effective closer. And he went and hired, I always forget the guy's name. The guy had been with the Yankees, who was a Boras client, and gave him $28 million for 2 years. And he wasn't very good, and he wasn't a good teammate, and he wasn't good in the clubhouse. And Storen lost 2 years of his career. And then Storen came back and was pitching very effectively again. A couple of years back, they needed an 8th inning guy, and Rizzo goes out and trades for Papelbon. And it's not like it was a secret that Papelbon was a bad guy. Everybody in baseball knew he was a bad guy. And when he demanded that his contract be guaranteed and that he had to close before agreeing to waive his no trade, that should have been a tip-off, that you don't want this guy in your clubhouse. We all know how that turned out. Now he went and rebuilt the bullpen during this offseason, and so far, not so good. So Rizzo's very good at judging young talent. You look at the young players in the organization, but not so great at the bullpen. And the other thing, I was thinking about this the other day, because I ran into Mark Patrick during the NCAA tournament, who's former radio guy who was Drew Storen's dad. And we were talking about Drew and where his career is right now. And Drew Storen was a great player rep about 5 minutes after he got smart. He was basically Strasburg's spokesman the first couple of years when Strasburg didn't like speaking to the media. I think you can't underrate, when you play 200 games together as a team, the importance of having a good clubhouse. And I'm not sure Rizzo has gotten that either through the years. So I'm not saying he's a bad GM. I don't want to overstate it. I'm saying, to me, this is an example of his main flaw.
But I can't argue that he hasn't been able to put the right pieces together in the bullpen. But I will say your earlier point about, remember, he told us privately, and he said publicly, he stood on the table for Dusty. So if the Lerners or whoever it is says we're going to move on from Dusty,
okay, I won't put that one on him.
Yeah, you can't blame him then for having to fire. He has to find a new pitching coach.
Yes, he did, and he basically said yesterday that he picked the wrong one.
Yeah.
That's part of his job, obviously. Or he could have left it to the manager. Now that's changed in baseball. It used to be in the old days that the manager put together the coaching staff. Now, often as not, the GM does it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I do think it's interesting because a lot of people are clamoring for Davey to go, and we like Davey because we met him a few times and whatever. He's such a nice guy. Yeah. So, and I don't know enough about some of these in-game moves where people are critical. I don't know that I've seen enough where this guy's just a disaster. Some people just want change for change's sake.
Right.
But Mike is not willing to go there. He has consistently backed Davey, but I think part of that also is because that was his hire, right?
It's his hire, right, yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. And, he's been sort of up and down with managerial hires. Bringing in Davey Johnson worked. Bringing in Matt Williams clearly did not work. Matt Williams, very much a Rizzo guy. Bringing in Dusty worked, although he wasn't their first choice, remember, but it did work. Mm-hmm. And so far, Davey Martinez has not worked. I think it's premature to fire a guy a month into his second season. And Davey walked into a tough situation for a first-time manager in that basically Dusty had been fired for not winning the World Series. So you bring in a new guy, it's because you're supposed to win the World Series, or at least win a playoff series. Well, they didn't get to the playoffs last year. And it may be because one of the things that happens is you tend to think because a guy sat next to a guy that he's going to be that guy. Now, Davey Martinez sat next to Joe Madden for, 4 years? And maybe he learned a lot from Joe Madden. Maybe he didn't. I don't think we know yet. I think it is too soon to pass judgment. I would like to see him, however, after, they lose a game they should win. I'd love to see him just go nuts in the clubhouse.
Be pissed off.
Yeah, I'd like to see him get, instead of saying, well, the guys are giving 100%. Well, giving 100% isn't enough. Winning is what you're there for.
I've seen that one time in one post-game presser, and I don't watch them all by any stretch. I watch very few. But I did see him get pissed off earlier this year one time, but it's very rare.
Yeah, and it needs to be rare, by the way. You can't just, blow your stack every time you lose a game because then it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's like my dad used to say to me about profanity. He said, if you use it all, pick your spots, and you're upset about something or when there's reason to, then people will look up and notice when you use it. I wish I'd followed his advice more often.
Yeah, I don't know what kind of impact a Derek Lilliquist would have or a pitching coach would have on a team. I would think that the veterans know how to prepare for a season. But he worked for the Cardinals. La Russa hired him. I mean, he can't be a complete buffoon.
No, and that's
he's not.
Clearly why Rizzo hired him, because he had a good resume.
Maybe he just had a bad chemistry with this particular staff, or
maybe it's not his fault.
Or it's not his fault. He's just a scapegoat.
Guy's just not performing.
Maybe the learners just said, hey, Mike, something's got to happen. If you don't want to fire Davey, okay, but you got to let someone go and make a statement.
Right.
Who knows?
Right. That may well be. And, again, we'll see who they bring in. And if that changes anything. Sometimes, as with changing managers or changing coaches in sports, you make a change, like you guys said earlier, for change's sake, and sometimes it helps. Sometimes a different voice is a good thing.